Hello everyone, welcome back to a new post today, and today let's see something which is good news for Sri Lanka. Yes, our very neighbor in the Indian Ocean. It's really good news for Sri Lanka because now it has got the guarantee from its creditor, that is we, India, to avail the bailout package from the IMF. Now, Sri Lanka, our neighbor, has experienced the worst economic crisis since its independence from Britain in 1948. So what's the good news for Sri Lanka actually? Let's look into the details. Sri Lanka occupies a very close status in India's foreign policy. Let me begin with that first. And it is a very important player in India's neighborhood first policy and also SAGAR, that is the security and growth for all in the region, that is the foreign policy doctrine of India in the Indian Ocean region. Sri Lanka now has received its first guarantee from India, which is one of its major creditors along with China and Japan. This is a precondition now from the IMF for IMF to provide Sri Lanka with a debt restructuring plan. And so India has availed this guarantee, and that too first from India. So the others, China came second, and now it's waiting the guarantee from the other creditors as well. Now, Sri Lanka was qualified for IMF extended fund facility of $2.9 billion to tide over its economic crisis. Now, this was a precondition for Colombo to avail the credit that its bilateral creditors must provide the financial assurances on debt sustainability. China, Japan and India are Sri Lanka's main bilateral creditors. Now, of the total debt, if you look in Sri Lanka, China's share is 52%. Japan is 19% and India is 12%. But without waiting for everybody else to give its guarantees, India was the first to give Sri Lanka the guarantee for it to help it avail the bailout package from IMF. So that's the very big news. So the process for availing the bailout package now has begun. India has assured the necessary guarantee sought by the IMF that could help Colombo to unlock the $2.9 billion package from IMF. India's Ministry of Finance has issued a letter stating to the IMF that it confirms to support Sri Lanka in the issue of debt restructuring. Now, India is the first major lender to publicly back the island in its effort to recover from the economic crisis. India has said that it has adhered to the neighborhood first policy and did the right thing to help its close neighbor, as it always did during the COVID and also during the recent economic crisis. Let me tell you, India was extended a $4 billion line of credit and rollovers to help Sri Lanka get through the crisis when it was in the early stage itself. Now, with the assurances now getting from India and Sri Lanka, now these assurances will be placed before the IMF board and the approval will come to Sri Lanka by March. Therefore, the money will be released for its debt restructuring. The second to provide the guarantee in line is China. China's Exim Bank delivered a letter to guaranteeing Sri Lanka a 2-year moratorium on the repayment of the loan. So what is the reason actually why is Sri Lanka in this crisis today? Let's look at a few brief points before we going into the further details. So it was in June 2022 that Wickremesinghe, Prime Minister, said in Parliament that the economy has collapsed and it was unable to pay for its very essentials, even food and milk also. In September 2022, a United Nations report said that the economic crisis is the result of the officials' impunity to human rights abuses. People suffered with power cuts and also shortages of basics like milk powder, fuel, food and even medicines. The inflation was at a runaway rate of 50%. The country did not have sufficient fuel for buses, trains, medical vehicles, and officials say it did not even have sufficient foreign currency to import any of the fuel as such. The country failed to make its interest payment on the foreign debt, and this was for the first time in the history that it defaulted. So why such a big crisis did Sri Lanka actually face? The major blame was actually the COVID pandemic because it affected Sri Lanka's tourist trade. It is one of the biggest foreign currency earners to Sri Lanka. It was also said that the tourists were frightened after a series of bomb attacks in 2019. The President Rajapaksa's poor economic mismanagement was one of the factors to blame for. Apart from that, at the end of the civil war in 2009, Sri Lanka now started to focus to provide goods to the domestic market instead of exporting goods and to boost the foreign trade. This meant income from the exports to the country remained very low and the bill for the imports started to keep growing, the main reason for running out of foreign currency. The next factor is that India started to import more than what it exported, and higher imports means more drawing of foreign currency reserves. At the end of 2019, if you can see, Sri Lanka had almost 7 billion in foreign currency reserves, which dropped to 250 million only. Also, Rajapaksa was criticized because he gave very big tax cuts in the 2019, which lost a lot of government income. Sri Lanka's foreign currency shortages also became a serious problem in the year 2021, and then the government started to limit them by banning the import of chemical fertilizers for agriculture. It told the farmers to use the locally used organic fertilizers instead, and this worsened the problem even more. This led to widespread crop failures, and Sri Lanka had to supplement its food stocks for imports, and this made foreign currency shortage even more worsening. These are some of the major reasons why the crisis has persisted for such a long time and why Sri Lanka actually went into a crisis mode, along with the now need for a bailout package from IMF. Now, there are some points that India made it very clear while giving the first guarantee as a creditor to the IMF, and India showed its full support to further investments into Sri Lanka to bail out the country even more from the economic crisis so that the country can earn even more money from that. Now, during the visit at the present Minister of External Affairs, Jaishankar, he made things very clear to Sri Lanka, saying that the financial assistance from the IMF is just a quick fix that cannot actually put Sri Lanka on a growth trajectory. And India was actually ready to put her hand forward for investments into Colombo and to create a right environment so that Sri Lanka can start earning. Jaishankar made it very clear that India is interested in energy, tourism and infrastructure. India also seeks to tap Sri Lanka's renewable energy potential. It wants to buy the surplus through an undersea cable, and also this will provide a sustainable source of revenue to Sri Lanka. Now, India and Sri Lanka have already started to work on a renewable energy framework that would take this cooperation forward. Also, India has offered the oil storage capacity at Trikonamali that can be utilized by both the countries to deal with their shortage of fuel crisis, and this can provide further revenue to Sri Lanka. India also wants to invest in major ports and also renewable energy like wind energy projects there. India is already taking up a large number of steps. Let's look at some of the regions that already India is working in Sri Lanka. So some of the major points that we can actually take into focus right now and see how India is already working in Sri Lanka is that India and Sri Lanka already have a free trade agreement that was signed as early as in 2000 to improve trade and economic relations between the two countries. India has been traditionally among Sri Lanka's largest trade partner, and Sri Lanka remains among largest trade partners of India in the SAARC region. In addition of being Sri Lanka's largest trade partner, India is also one of the largest contributors of FDI or foreign direct investment to Sri Lanka. Apart from the growth in trade and investment, India has been the largest source market of tourists visiting Sri Lanka every year, and this was also proved by a report in the post-pandemic period. To enhance further connectivity between the two countries, India and Sri Lanka have entered into an open sky agreement enabling Sri Lankan Airlines to operate unlimited number of flights to the 6 Indian airports. Now, Sri Lanka Airlines is also the largest foreign carrier in India. India is partnering with Sri Lanka to endeavour to provide it access to clean water and sanitation. The emergency ambulance service is the largest Indian grant project to Sri Lanka after the Indian housing project. A line of credit of 100 million has been provided already by Sri Lanka for renewable energy and solar power projects. Now, with India's assistance, India is developing the Kankesanturai harbour along with the Northern Railways, Southern Railways, and also its ferry services and highways as well. India is also very recently has agreed to jointly modernize this Triconamallee oil tank farm with Sri Lanka so that both the countries can benefit with regard to energy security. India is also provided a 400 million SAARC currency swap agreement. So these are the broad areas of already the involvement of India into the Sri Lankan country. I hope you can build on this further. And as concluding, I would say that India has once again come to the rescue of its neighbor following the neighborhood first policy. India has never taken a back step to provide help to the neighbors, be it the COVID-19 or during the tsunami and also the recent economic crisis of Sri Lanka. India has stood as a time-tested weather friend to Sri Lanka. And this further providing of guarantee to the IMF to support its debt restructuring plan is only a step towards deepening of cooperation with further assurances that India really wants to invest more in Sri Lanka, be it in energy, tourism or the infrastructure sector. This is a step only to deepen the cooperation and the friendship with Sri Lanka on a long-term basis further. I hope these points were helpful to you all to know about what the good news for Sri Lanka is and why Sri Lanka came into this economic crisis and how actually India is helping Sri Lanka in its economy. I hope these points were helpful to you all, and if you did like it, please do comment, like, share and subscribe, and I shall see you in my next post with another new topic that made news on that day. And until then, it's happy learning. Bye-bye.